Okay. Okay, let's go. This sikha that we're going to learn is printed in volume 2 called the Sikhas, and it was said by the Rebbe. The truth is, I shouldn't say it was said by the Rebbe. And the date it was said, there was a Chas, the Rebbe Rashab, who the Rebbe Rashab would always look at him during his talks because he was sufficiently refined to be a vessel to be able to, the Rebbe could look at him. He's sharing these very deep insights of Torah. And at one point he was thinking, listening to the Rebbe Rashab, this one's a rerun. I heard this one before. He's saying a discourse which was based upon the discourse of another Rebbe. And when he said that, the Rebbe Rashab averted his eyes from him. It was no longer a vessel to receive it. So we can only really learn. The Rebbe actually once said about the Kut Sichas, about learning Sichas from the volumes. The Rebbe Sichas said, when you learn a Sicha, the Rebbe's words, Pashas or A, not Tashim and Vav, the Rebbe said, it shouldn't be learning an old book with the Sichas. Rather, it should be that you see the leader of the generation right in front of you and saying to you, this is what you need to do. Anyways, this from Rengen was said in Pashas Matas Masei Tashentes Tezayin, 1956. So regarding this upcoming Shabbos, there's a famous teaching of the B'ditchev Rebbe, and Shabbos Chazein, Hashem shows every single Jew the third Beis Hamikdash, and that's why it's called a Shabbos of vision. This will help us understand why Parshas Dvarim always falls out in Shabbos Chazein. Parshas Dvarim is beginning of the Mishnah Torah. Although it's all one Torah, the Mishnah Torah is different than the previous 4 Chumashim because the Mishnah Torah was said to the generation that was about to enter Israel, and therefore there were certain things that needed to be said then that weren't needed before. The difference between the generation entering Israel and the generation that was in the desert is as follows. The generation in the desert were a very knowledgeable generation, knowledgeable in the sense that they had something of Moshe Rabbeinu's knowledge. The word knowledge doesn't mean that they knew a lot of Encyclopedia Britannica or something. Knowledge means that they felt a connection to godliness. They had das. They had a vision, they had a clear vision of godliness. Generation entering Israel didn't have this clear vision of godliness. Rather, what they had is called Shemiah. They had a audio channel to godliness, if you will, which means the pasuk says this. Moshe tells the Jewish people, "Now Israel, you should listen." Which the surface is just telling them to listen, but this highlights this as this is a different kind of generation. The generation is only able to hear, not able to see. What's the difference between if it's visual or audio? What's the difference? When you see something, there are no limitations. There's nothing that can take you away from what you saw. There's no one or no thing or no time that will ever put a doubt in what you saw because you yourself saw it. On the other hand, when you hear something, although while you hear it, it does get absorbed in you very well, but still a question that rises can question what you heard. So that indicates that even while you are connected to this idea that you heard about and you believe it, it's still not, there's a limited connection you have to this idea. It's not infinite. The very fact that it could get uprooted indicates that even while it's there in a limited way. So the generation that enters Israel, they don't see godliness, they only hear about godliness. That means that their connection to Hashem, we're not talking about the connection of the essence of the soul, which is the same by everyone. We're talking about their experience. Their connection to Hashem is similar to hearing about some very important information from a trusted friend that you act upon. or maybe even you hear from a friend something that's fundamental to life itself, that you really need to hear, and you really believe it and you're connected to it. But how connected are you to it? There's a beginning and an end. There's a limitation of how connected you are to it. So the generation that enters Israel, because they have a limited connection to Hashem, therefore there are things that they need to be told about. The generations before didn't need to know about. There's a similar concept that we learned about a long time ago in the Maimer Yudatu Dechachecha. That Maimer there makes a difference, a distinction between the first section of Shema and the second section of Shema. And he says that the first section of Shema speaks of a visual perception of godliness. And that's why the first section of Shema is all romance. You should love Hashem with all your heart, soul, and might. In the second section of Shema, then the Torah starts talking about consequences. If you will listen, there'll be rain. If you'll listen, there will be grass for your animals. If you'll listen, you'll be satiated. If you won't listen, then you'll be chased out of the land, and all kinds of negative stuff will happen. Why did he need to break the romance with all these consequences? The reason Hashem needed to tell us all these things is because in the second section of Shema, we're talking about the part of us which doesn't have this vivid perception of godliness. It doesn't have this clear channel to Hashem. It's only in a way of shemiya, in a way of hearing, in a way of understanding. It's not so vivid. It's not so clear. And therefore, to keep us in check, there has to be a discussion of consequences. So in a similar way, the Rebbe says, talking from a different angle over here, talking about the generation that entered Israel, the Rebbe says that they needed to say Shema at a period. They had to have the whole mitzvah of saying Shema. Before that period of entering Israel, there was no need to say Shema. Entering Israel, they needed the mitzvah of Shema. Why do they suddenly need the mitzvah of Shema? Because in order to, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the reason why it's close to each of us to keep the Torah all the time is because if we are ready to give our lives, rather than sever our bond with Hashem, how much more so should we be ready to give up any other insignificant thing? So the generation entering Israel didn't have to give their lives, didn't have to fight losing wars, but still they had to contend with their own Yetzer Hara. In order to win the Yetzer Hara, you have to be ready to die. You have to have Mesiras Nefesh. So that generation needed to hear about that, need to say Shema twice a day to inculcate into their psyche this truth, which is that I do not want to lose my connection with Hashem. That's the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu gave us this mitzvah. Then, so despite the fact that the generation entering Israel is lower than the generation that was in the desert, it still has an advantage that surpasses the generation of the desert. Concerning the generation entering their Israel, Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, you have not yet arrived at the place of tranquility. That means until you get to Yerushalayim, you're not yet at the place of tranquility. That means there's something they're getting that wasn't there before. Why is Israel called a place of tranquility? Because it's specifically because they have entered Israel and they have descended and they've lost something spiritual and they're getting in touch with the physical. Because it is a descent, they have an opportunity there to fulfill God's intent in making a home for Hashem in a way that is tranquil. So it is a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, we're saying entering Israel is a loss. You're in the desert, you're with Moshe Rabbeinu, you're hearing the deepest insights in Torah. You have a visual perception of Hashem. You can't compare to that. You can't. And to show you're plowing and planting, and as holy as the tomatoes and cucumbers are in Israel, it's still not the same as the Chassidus and the revelation of the godliness of the man and there was tranquility there too. On the contrary, there's more tranquility in the desert from a physical perspective. They're there, relaxed, have all their needs taken care of. So in the desert, there is a spiritual and physical oasis. And yet Hashem says that's not my intended creation. What I want in creation is I want a dir tachtenim. I want a home in the lowest realm. it can get lower than the desert. So yes, that will make you lower. You hear what Hashem is telling us? Here, I will make you lower. Although it will make you lower, but that's my intent. So that means the theme of Parshas Dvarim begins a new era in two ways. Number one, it's a big descent. On the other hand, this descent is the whole point of why Hashem made the world. And that's the meaning of Shabbos Chazain. There's two opposites. On the one hand, this Shabbos is part of the 9 days. And even more, it's a Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. It's a time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. On the other hand, it's specifically because it's about the Yerida, it's about the descent, it's about the consummate of boundless. That's why it's part of the vision of the third Beis Hamikdash. It's because it's a Yerida, because it's a descent, that's why it's part of the Aliyah, it's part of the elevation. I think that this is a very fundamental concept in Chassidus, that if you understand this concept well, you'll be able to understand a lot of things in your life and a lot of things that we learned about in many other discourses in the Sichas. The Eibishter wants a person to be in a place of challenge, a place where he's losing something, and he's gaining and he's losing at the same time. That's why it's so difficult, because it's hard to know where you are. There was a similar thing we learned about once. I don't know if you remember. We learned about the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was upset at his teacher. I think his teacher's name was Rabbi Skabla. Yisachar Dave of Lubavitch, and his name was Skabla. Alter was upset about it at him because he didn't tell him about the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe did meet the Baal Shem Tov, and before the Alter was born, the Baal Shem Tov told his parents that when the Alter would be born, he'd be born in Chayelo. And he told them lots of things to do with him. And he told them that they could bring him to the Baal Shem Tov one time when he had an upshanish. That was it. And Alter was very affected by the upshanish experience. Alter asked the whole way who was that man, and they told the Alter Rebbe that was your Zayda, and he was asking questions about Zayda the whole time. So there definitely was something of the Baal Shem Tov that the Alter Rebbe absorbed. He saw the Baal Shem Tov. On the other hand, he wasn't allowed to know more. His teacher didn't let him know more, and he was upset about it. Until the Alter Rebbe said he stopped being upset when he learned about the name Elokim. The name Elokim, as we learned a few times, Elokim is numerically equivalent to the word nature. It's numerically equivalent to the word concealment. It's numerically equivalent to the word submerged nature. And it's numerically equivalent to the word nickname. The Eibish's nickname is Elokim. Why is it his nickname? Your nickname, Yasser Eber told me yesterday that Yosef is Gematria Yud Kivavke and Yossi is Gematria Elokim. So there is the way the Eibishter really is, the way he truly is, the way he is above nature, the way he is infinite. And there's the way the Eibishter conceals his light and submerges his light in nature in the way of concealment. That's Elokim. So when the Eibishter contracts his light, that's the way he relates to us through his nickname, if you will. So it's a concealment. On the other hand, that concealment is the whole point of creation. The Eibishter cannot have the goal of creation, which is a home in the lowest realm, without Elokim. So in a similar way, the Baal Shem Tov, in comparison to where the Alter Rebbe was at that time, was a revelation of Yud Kei Vav Kei. It was a revelation of the infinite light of Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe wanted that infinite revelation of Hashem that the Baal Shem Tov was going to be able to give him. But that wasn't the intent of Hashem. Hashem wanted specifically that the Alter Rebbe shouldn't reveal the Torah in the same way as Baal Shem Tov. He shouldn't just be another continuation of Baal Shem Tov. He should specifically bring us. The Chassidim say that the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe quote this: the Baal Shem Tov put up a ladder to how to serve, to show you this is where you're supposed to serve Hashem, and the Alter Rebbe showed us how to climb that ladder. How do you actually do that? Baal Shem Tov says this is what Emunah is. Emunah means that you're able to cross the ocean with a handkerchief. Now Alter Rebbe says let's break that down a little bit. What are you exactly believing? Why are you believing that? Well, so when you put it into your seichel, put it into intellect, there's a lot of Elokim there. There's a lot of logic. There's a lot of concealment there. On the other hand, that's what makes Hashem part of you. Maybe you see more Hashem in the generation of the desert. You see more of Hashem there, but you see more of the Jew in the generation that's entering Eretz Yisrael. You see more of the world. You see more of the world becoming a place for Hashem in the desert. It's kind of like we just had in this past parsha, the difference between the staffs and the branches. When the soul's in heaven, the soul's compared to a branch. The branch is attached to its source. It has moisture. There's It's not. It's affected by the seasons. It's pliable. When it gets separate from its source, it dries up and hardens. So on the one hand, it's a lot better. There's a lot to say about the advantage of being attached to your source. On the other hand, there's a resilience that the neshama achieves specifically by losing its connection to Gan Eden, and similarly, when the neshama leaves the Beis Hamikdash and the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and Eden are now in Golus, they lose a lot of the light of Hashem, lose a lot of Hashem, but they discover a lot more of themselves. They discover a lot more of their own ability to serve Hashem without that revelation. You see more of Hashem in time of the Beis Hamikdash. See more of the Jew in time of exile. I was in Yeshiva Marstown. He saw that first weeks I was in Yeshiva, I was like upset. I was upset. I was coming from the oasis of Renoir. Renoir was such a wonderful place. Then,
great food.
terrible food. Terrible food. But actually tried to eat whole French breads last few weeks there, so mother shouldn't see that how much weight I lost. Anyways, you know how big those things are? Anyways, I couldn't eat a whole one. I ate a lot of it. Anyways, so it was really a spiritual oasis there. And I came to Morristown, and the first night I was there was a Fabrengen. The guys took out these cigarette cartons and beer kegs, and I'm like, it wasn't a keg. It was 6 packs of beer, whatever. And Melch's like, how do you like Morristown? I'm like, listen, you can't compare this to Benoit. Benoit was like, you felt the holiness in the air. You felt you're in a place of holiness. You felt like it's Shabbos. It was Shabbos. It was Farbeng. It was just a kislev. You felt it in the air. He said, yeah, but that's the whole point, though. The whole point is that you should be in a place where we don't have that, and you should serve Hashem on your own. And that's what they're saying here. What's Shabbos Chazain? The Shabbos of destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is the Shabbos of the vision of the Beis Hamikdash. You know what that means? That means when you're in a state of Yerida yourself, your own Beis Hamikdash is being destroyed. The Eibusher is busy rebuilding your Beis Hamikdash. Hashem wants something new to happen, something higher to happen. It may seem lower, but on the other hand, there's something else that's better. There's something lost in the place of light in a Baal Tshuva, but there's something that's gained in the place of neshama in the Baal Tshuva. That's why the Gemara says a place of Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik Gomer cannot stand. On the one hand, can you compare Baal Tshuva to a tzaddik? Beryl Baumgartner was shown. He once said to a group of Jews, he's amazing, Beryl. They found after he passed away all of his correspondence with the Rebbe. He said lots of crazy stuff to the Rebbe. He asked the Rebbe every kind of question that you would want to ask, and the Rebbe answered him. Incredible things. Like he told the Rebbe, like, I'm learning this mimer about Malchus. Malchus in the whole picture of Ishtalshlus, of the divine order of creation, it's pretty low down the totem pole, right? But he writes, what do I understand about Malchus, these high levels? What are we talking about? And why should I learn this? Like that kind of things he spoke to the Rebbe, like, what is this for? So one of the things he told the Rebbe was that he was at a certain gathering of Jews over there in Argentina or Brazil, wherever he was, and he's told them that the Behil Parasher said, which is what he said, you hear what the Rebbe said in a second, that the reason why a tzaddik cannot stand in the place of Baal Tshuva, because the Baal Tshuva, they don't have the appropriate, they don't have the aura of holiness. A tzaddik can't stand to be around them. Stever said, it's wrong what you said, and it's chaval, it's a loss. They said it to people. It's like, how dare you say that? So on the other hand, you cannot say that the tzaddik experiences godliness in the same way as a Baal Tshuva. Tzaddik has Ruach HaKodesh. Hashem speaks to him. You can hear Hashem speak to him. It's different experience. On the other hand, in a Baal Tshuva, you see more of the neshama. So the Shabbos of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is the Shabbos that they're building the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because the Eibishter wants the Yerida, the descent, in order to have a home in the lowest realm. So it's precisely by being in the lowest realm that you can make that home for Hashem. There's something that you could achieve there you couldn't achieve before. So yeah, the Yidden went out I'll leave you with this. When the Chassidim of the Baal Shem Tov heard that the Baal Shem Tov had been in the chamber of Mashiach, and Mashiach had told the Baal Shem Tov that he's going to come when your well springs will be spread to the outside, how do you think they felt about that? They were so upset they cried. They cried. The well springs have to go to the outside. How horrible. How horrible to take us to the outside. It's a terrible thing. But the Eibishter didn't think so. The Eibishter says, I want the home in the lowest room. In a similar way, when you make a mistake, what do you think to make a mistake? You think how horrible it is to make a mistake. What does the Eibishter say? The Eibishter says, oh, now there's something deeper that can happen. Now something better can happen. There's a higher level of tshuva. Something in every single mistake that the Eibishter, hey, was machter. Okay, one more thing, let you go. There was a Rashi this past Shabbos, such a phenomenal talk of the Rebbe on this Rashi. Rashi talks about the various journeys that we took when we were in Eretz Yisrael. And he gives an example of a father and son. And the father and son discuss their journey throughout wherever they were, and they go over different places they were on their journey. Rashi says the expression, here is where we got cold, here is where we slept, and here is where you hurt your head. Here's where your head was messed up. So the Rebbe notes that the father is talking to the child everything in the we. He's talking to the child in the we. We slept, we got cold. And all of a sudden the father switches to, here's where you hurt your head. What happened? How come, if the Abish is talking to us what happened to the Jewish people and how he guided us and so we, why do you suddenly switch to the you hurt your head? So in short, the Rebbe says that the you hurt your head is referring to where you made a mistake. Is where the Jewish people were in a state of confusion and they started doing bad things. So therefore, do you hurt your head? It was your own thing. And then there actually adds the word v'chulu. V'chulu means etc. Etc. is sort of like beep, like something you shouldn't say. Beep, etc. means not just a mistake you made then, but all the future mistakes that a Jew will ever make. Hashem says, I want you to know that although you did this with your own decision, it's part of the journeys between Israel and Egypt. It's part of the way to get to Israel. Although you hurt your head by your own volition, it's the hardest thing to understand this, by the way. So it's easy to understand theoretically by a Hasidus. When you think about yourself in your life, do you really think the mistakes you made today, mistakes you made yesterday, mistakes you made that Avish that's part of your journey, you don't really feel that way. You feel like, I made these mistakes, I have to suffer for them. But the Abish doesn't want you to look at it that way. He wants you to realize that even when you hurt your head, the truth is that's you're going somewhere. Jews are going to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, that's different. That's part of Hashem's plan. But even when you hurt your head and there's your own personal yerida, your own personal descent, it's part of the building of the third base of English in yourself. Any questions or comments? All right, shkech.